Creating the Worlds of Star Wars was published in 2005, a few months after the release of Episode 3, and it is a behind-the-scenes photo book that goes through the original and prequel trilogies scene by scene, or rather set by set, because the focus of the book is mainly on facts and details of the creation and use of these sets, not in the conceptual or artistic sense, but rather in the practical and technical sense of like, here's what we built for this location, here's how we shot different elements to be composited together, including lots of miniatures and models. Really, here's how we used movie magic and ingenuity to bring certain aspects of the environments to life or enhance them using physical crafts and techniques as well as optical and digital visual effects. And then that's also supplemented sometimes by little details or anecdotes of the shoot itself. It is principally a book of behind-the-scenes photos, and they are absolutely brilliant in terms of curation and what they depict. This book is a treasure trove of rare and exclusive behind-the-scenes photos for both trilogies. The only exception is that there are too many stills from the films, though at least they are used honestly rather than as lazy filler, in that the intent is clearly to demonstrate how the set looked versus the final frame. Also, these stills are almost always the smallest images, so I appreciate that, but even so, they're not necessary, and collectively it's a lot of space that could have been better used. The book was actually conceived as a showcase for panorama photos of the prequel sets, so there are a lot of those, and they're very cool, but because they're long 360-degree images, they're also very awkward, both to present in book form and to look at because of the visual distortion. The book's created and written by John Knoll, who was the visual effects supervisor for the prequels and special editions. In terms of the text's quality, he is an outstanding author and taken great advantage of his knowledge and insider position. Quantity-wise, though, he is half-arsing it, but there is still a lot of really great information here, and the quality of the text succeeds because it focuses on and marries the hows and whys, and details, specificity, and just simply information worth recording. Something which is apparently too much to ask of 99% of behind-the-scenes books, but as I said, the photos are the main event, so it's not surprising that the text is here to augment them rather than the reverse. So the text is kinda like glorified captions, but they work together so well because of that, because the text is specific to the images rather than just generalized. The only time the text does falter are the occasions where it really is just a caption describing the image or scene. Even though John Knoll was not there for the original trilogy like he was for the prequels, the text for both trilogies is very consistent, so there is plenty of great information for the original trilogy too. He's clearly done his homework and spoken to people who were there, in addition to simply being very knowledgeable about this stuff. The original trilogy does only get a third of the book though, with the other 2/3 being on the prequels, but this uneven division is very sensible, because the originals had already been documented in lots of sources. Feeling the need to give the trilogies an equal page count here could have resulted in using a lot of space in the book to repeat things we've already seen and heard, compared to using the space available more wisely by giving it to the less documented prequels. This especially paid off as a good decision, given that 2 years later is when Rinzler's making of books for the originals started coming out, and it's awesome that this book complements those ones really well, which would have been the complete opposite and damaged both had there been more overlap. However, this praise about giving more space to the prequels is kind of only in theory, because the way it's actually been done, one very surprising and disappointing aspect is that the visual offerings for the prequels are noticeably worse, not just because it's a bunch of green screens, but because of the rise in film stills and decrease in behind-the-scenes photos. For the original trilogy section, it was probably averaging 2 to 3 behind-the-scenes photos per set, whereas the prequels drops to like 1 to 2, which seems inexplicably weird considering when the book was made and by whom. So even though the prequel movies get more pages, they're not really getting more content proportional to that. No matter what the case, obviously the best option would have been to release this as 2 separate books, because as good as the text quality is, its major weakness and limitation is its quantity. Now don't get me wrong, the book offers more than enough visual and informational content to be worth the price, but not proportional compared to the subject matter, and especially, far worse, what it should have given the space available. Each of the sets included gets a 2-page spread, sometimes 2, but the text is only ever a sentence to a short paragraph. Again, fantastic text and fantastic images, but then that's disappointing when you get so little, yet there's so much blank space throughout the book that should have been used for more. The handling of this book's layout is atrocious, in fact just stupid, the amount of blank space. If you removed all the blank space and stills, this book would genuinely be 250 pages shorter. That's an astronomical amount of content, a whole other book's worth of content that it has the space for, but instead is just wasted. And that goes for the images too. 750-page book, that's massive. but you have to remember not only is it covering 6 huge movies, but also every other page only contains 1 image. Meanwhile, on the opposite page, even ignoring the stills, plenty of images are way too small yet surrounded by blank space. This incredibly poor use of space, given how much it's trying to cover, severely sabotages the book's potential to be significantly greater and more satisfying. It has these unnecessary, disappointing limitations that impede its best aspects, its reason for existing, because it's only offering a couple of photos per set and the text is only offering a couple of sentences every other page. Despite them being great and despite being unified by the book's focus area, it still just ends up feeling like a book of random bits and pieces Star Wars trivia, rather than a proper or more meaningful exploration of its subject area or honest use and maximization of its assets. I said earlier how the big thing this book offers is its large number of rare and exclusive images, but of course take that claim with a grain of salt, because asking how much of this stuff has been published before or even since is impractical given the sheer quantity of Star Wars behind the scenes books and documentation. You can't compare it or even remember everything you've seen and heard. But my point is that in terms of offering my personal impression, rather than any sort of quantifiable data, I consider this book's content to be highly desirable and enjoyable even for the fan who has everything. As long as you have an appreciation and interest in the content it offers, of course. If you're not especially enamored by an experience that is 90% looking at behind the scenes photos, mostly of sets, then this isn't the book you're looking for. And yet, frustratingly, if that is what you want, you're still probably not going to be as satisfied as you would expect for such a chunky and specific book, given the lack of comprehensive or deeper coverage it should have had. Even though it's not a book you can go to for the full picture on anything, it's still a good one to use to supplement other sources, because even though it's not exhaustively detailed, it's still a great book for details, even if only in a here's a fact from that set kind of way. It's excellent, insightful information, and why I still love the text. Ditto the images. If it doesn't offer as much as it should, it still offers a lot, and more importantly, making sure that what it does offers is predominantly of quality, which is why it's still a valuable addition to one's Star Wars library. I've mentioned the most serious failings the book has, but it also has some other aspects I'd just classify as clumsy oddities, even before you open the book. First of all, the 365 Days title is so weird and unnecessary. It actually refers to a series of 365 Days books which have nothing to do with Star Wars, and what does that number mean in this context anyway? It's not a calendar or anything to do with dates or time, so rather than just have the content dictate how many entries the book needs, it's being determined by an arbitrary number. The cover's terrible in that it could be for any Star Wars book rather than communicating what this one's about. In 2012 there was a second edition with a new cover that still fails on that front. The content of both editions is exactly the same, except the second edition did not include the accompanying CD the first edition had. Not that it really matters anymore, because the CD's contents all run using Flash Player, so I don't even know how to view it anymore. I tried using emulators and extracting the files from the discs, but couldn't get anything proper. From what I recall, it was more photos and panoramas that you could pan through. There might have been some videos too, and I can't remember how much, if any, overlaps with the book's content. I spoke about how this book is best used to supplement other sources, so it is very handy there's a great index at the back, though it directs you to the entry number, because this book doesn't really have page numbers. There are numbers in the footer of each page, but it looks like it's meant to be a time code counting down in intervals I don't understand. I'm sure there's a technical and mathematical explanation that's beyond me, but it does seem like another strange, unnecessary inclusion at the expense of having page numbers that are actually useful. Lastly, the book's format is also odd and interesting. It's pretty much the dimensions of an actual brick, though it's not exactly the optimal format. In theory, I still really appreciate the good judgment of giving this book an appropriately smaller page size compared to what you may expect based on what we usually see for visual books, which are invariably unnecessarily overblown formats. However, it's almost never the size that's the actual issue, but its use, and that's where my theoretical appreciation of the smaller page size ends, because in reality it's still been as incompetently used as the larger books, though at least this has the decency to result in a less physically and financially burdensome waste compared to the obnoxiously oversized crap we usually have to bear.